The morning sun filtered through the massive glass windows of Denver International Airport, casting long shadows across the polished terminal floors. Officer had been awake since 4:30 a.m., well before his 7:00 a.m. shift, a habit he developed over his 17 years in law enforcement. He couldn't sleep on days when Duke was scheduled to work. There was an unspoken electricity between them, something that went beyond the typical handler-dog relationship. Sat in his small apartment downtown, nursing black coffee while Duke lay across the worn leather couch, his dark brown eyes tracking every movement. The German Shepherd seemed to sense that today would be different, though neither of them could have possibly known the magnitude of what awaited them. When arrived at the Denver Police Department's K-9 unit facility at 6:45 a.m., the other handlers were already there. There was Officer with his German Shepherd, Tank, a powerful dog trained for narcotics detection. Then there was Officer with her Belgian, Shadow, specialized in explosive detection. But Duke was different. Over the past 7 years of their partnership, had come to recognize that Duke possessed something beyond standard training, an almost supernatural intuition. Duke had saved lives before. 18 months ago, he'd alerted to a woman in a shopping mall who was suffering a silent heart attack. 9 months ago, he detected a child with an undiagnosed seizure disorder in a parking lot. The department had documented these incidents, but they remained largely unknown to the public. What made Duke exceptional wasn't just his training. It was his instinctive ability to recognize human suffering in ways that seemed to defy scientific explanation. Had always been a logical man, trained in protocol and procedure. Yet Duke had taught him to trust something beyond logic. The partnership had begun 7 years ago when Duke was just a 2-year-old with incredible athleticism but behavioral issues. Other trainers had recommended the dog be reassigned. Something about Duke's intensity, his refusal to follow standard procedures, his obsessive need to investigate specific individuals rather than areas. These traits didn't fit the typical K-9 profile, but saw potential where others saw problems. He saw a dog with a calling, even if that calling didn't align with conventional training. So had worked with Duke outside standard protocols, allowing the dog more freedom to trust his instincts, rewarding him when his seemingly erratic behavior led to discovering genuine problems. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, had packed Duke's favorite treats, organic chicken strips that the dog loved, and prepared his equipment with unusual care. He checked Duke's collar twice, though it didn't need checking. He brushed the dog's already perfect coat, something he rarely did. Standing before the mirror in the K-9 unit's locker room, noticed the slight gray beginning to appear in his own hair. He was 52 years old, and Duke was 7, both approaching the later chapters of their working years. This awareness made him more appreciative of their time together, more attentive to the dog's signals. The briefing that morning was routine. The Denver Police Department's K-9 unit was assigned to Terminal C at Denver International Airport for security patrol and crowd management. It was considered relatively light duty. Airport patrols were usually uneventful, predictable, and low stress compared to narcotics raids or explosive detection scenarios. Terminal C was the terminal, recently renovated, and statistically one of the safest areas of the airport. The briefing officer mentioned that Tuesday was moderately busy, with a few international flights and several domestic routes. Nothing extraordinary, nothing that would suggest anything unusual was about to occur. And Duke arrived at Terminal C at 8:15 a.m., giving themselves time to acclimate to the environment before their official 9:00 a.m. patrol began. They walked the corridors slowly, letting Duke become familiar with the smells and sounds. The airport had its own distinctive atmosphere, a blend of jet fuel, cleaning chemicals, thousands of human bodies moving through the space, countless emotional states concentrated in a single location. Fear, excitement, anxiety, joy, all these emotions permeated the air, and had always believed Duke could sense them. They passed through the food court area, where the smell of cinnamon rolls and coffee mingled with the underlying airport odor. They walked past the gift shop, where tourists browsed last-minute souvenirs. They moved through the security checkpoint area, where TSA agents worked their morning shifts with practiced efficiency. By 8:45 a.m., and Duke had completed their preliminary sweep. The dog seemed calm, centered, alert but not agitated, grabbed a coffee from one of the terminal cafes and checked his watch. He had about 15 minutes before he needed to begin the official patrol route. He found a relatively quiet corner near Gate 7 and settled onto one of the cushioned seats, Duke immediately lying down at his feet in that perfect alert position that showcased the dog's training. Sipped his coffee and watched people moving through the terminal. This was his favorite part of patrol work, the people watching, the observation, the quiet moments before the shift officially began. There was a businessman rushing past, tie askew, looking frantically at his phone, recognized the signs of someone who might miss a flight. There was an elderly couple moving slowly, the woman holding the man's arm, both dressed in their best clothes as if this was a special occasion. Perhaps they were traveling to sea. There was a group of college students, loud and excited, undoubtedly heading somewhere fun for fall break. There were families with small children, some of the kids crying, overwhelmed by the airport environment. To most observers, it was just the normal flow of humanity through a modern transportation hub. But to, trained by years of police work to observe human behavior, and to Duke, trained by nature and experience to sense what humans could not, this was a living tapestry of stories, needs, and secrets. As 9:00 a.m. approached, finished his coffee and stood, Duke immediately rose to his feet, shaking slightly as if preparing himself for the work ahead. "Ready, buddy?" asked, scratching behind the dog's ears. Duke's tail wagged once, a controlled, professional wag, not the exuberant enthusiasm of a pet, but the focused readiness of a working partner. They began their official patrol route, moving into the main terminal corridor where the gate areas were located. The crowd had thickened slightly. The departure board showed multiple flights boarding or preparing to board. The air smelled of fresh pastries from the bakery, perfume from dozens of travelers, and that persistent underlying scent unique to airports everywhere. And Duke moved with practiced synchronization, the officer's pace matching the dog's natural gait. They'd walked together thousands of times, through parking lots, through shopping centers, through airports and train stations. Their movements were almost choreographed, a dance refined through years of partnership. The morning sun continued streaming through the massive windows, creating a beautiful and seemingly ordinary Tuesday at Denver International Airport. Neither nor Duke could have anticipated that within the next few minutes, their lives would intersect with fate in a way that would resonate far beyond the terminal walls, touching hearts across the nation and proving, once again, that sometimes the greatest heroes walk on four legs and communicate through barks, whines, and an intuition that science has only begun to understand. The moment happened without warning, without preamble, without any indication that the world was about to shift, and Duke had been patrolling Terminal C for approximately 47 minutes. They'd walked past Gate 3, Gate 5, Gate 7, and were approaching Gate 9, where a Southwest Airlines flight was in the final boarding stages. The terminal was moderately crowded, not the chaotic rush of holiday travel, but busier than a typical Tuesday morning. Families clustered near gates, business travelers typed frantically on their laptops, small children pressed their noses against the windows watching planes on the tarmac below. Duke's behavior had been flawless all morning. The dog moved with the calm confidence of a professional, his dark eyes constantly scanning, his nose working methodically through the air. Had been thinking about lunch, wondering if he'd grab something from the food court during his break, when he felt it, a sudden tension rippling through the leash. Not a pull, not yet, but a shift in Duke's entire body chemistry. It was like holding the leash of a dog that had just caught an unfamiliar scent. Attention immediately snapped from his own thoughts to complete focus on his partner. Duke had stopped walking, Not gradually, not with hesitation, but with the abruptness of a car slamming on brakes. His entire muscular frame went rigid, every fiber of his being focused on something invisible to human perception. Felt the hair on the back of his own neck stand up. He'd learned that when Duke went into this state, something significant was happening. The dog's ears perked forward at an almost painful angle, the muscles in his neck corded tight. His nose twitched rapidly, almost vibrating, pulling in information from the air around them at a speed and depth that human senses couldn't begin to comprehend. "Duke," said quietly, alert and attentive, ready to respond to whatever his partner was detecting. But Duke didn't respond to his handler's gentle query. Instead, the dog's body began to tremble slightly, and then came the sound that would echo through the terminal and into the memories of hundreds of witnesses: a bark. It wasn't the controlled alert bark that Duke had been trained to use. Those barks were measured, precise, exactly calibrated to alert handlers without causing panic. This bark was different. It emerged from deep within the dog's chest with a raw urgency that spoke to something primal. It was a bark filled with desperation, with an almost frantic need to communicate. The sound was loud enough to turn heads throughout the entire terminal area. Passengers stopped mid-conversation. A child froze with a pretzel halfway to his mouth. An elderly woman dropped her carry-on bag with a sharp clang. "Duke, heel, quiet," commanded, using his authoritative handler voice, the same voice that had always, without exception, immediately corrected the dog's behavior. But Duke ignored him completely. The German Shepherd pulled forward on the leash with a force that caught completely off guard. In 7 years of partnership, Duke had never disobeyed a direct command. Never. The dog's entire attention was laser-focused on a specific location approximately 30 feet away, near the departure board for Gate 9. His eyes followed the direction of Duke's intense gaze and landed on a small family group. A woman in her early 40s, dressed in professional attire, dark slacks and a blue blouse, stood holding the hand of a young child. The girl couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, with pigtails and wearing a bright pink jacket. She held a small roller bag decorated with stickers of cartoon characters. In her other hand, she clutched a ticket envelope. The mother and daughter appeared completely oblivious to Duke's escalating distress, standing calmly while waiting to board their flight. Duke barked again, more insistent this time. Then again, and again. The barks echoed through the terminal with increasing volume and intensity. It was as if the dog was trying to communicate something of vital importance, something that transcended the normal protocols of his training. People were definitely staring now. Some looked concerned. Others looked annoyed. A businessman several gates away made a comment loud enough to be heard. "What's wrong with that dog? It sounds angry." "Excuse me, can you control your dog?" called out a TSA agent stationed nearby, her hand instinctively moving toward her hip. She'd been trained to consider any disruption a potential security risk. Pulled hard on the leash, trying to establish control, but Duke was stronger than he'd ever felt the dog before. It was as if every muscle in the shepherd's body was engaged in a single-minded mission. "I'm trying," called back to the agent, his own voice filled with confusion and alarm. He'd never been in this situation before. Duke was legendary in the department for his discipline and control. This wasn't like him at all. The little girl in the pink jacket suddenly looked up at the sound of Duke's increasingly frantic barking. Her mother, Sarah, instinctively wrapped her arm protectively around her daughter, pulling her closer. The girl's eyes widened with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Other parents began steering their children away from the vicinity, not wanting them near what appeared to be an out-of-control police dog. The entire energy of the terminal began shifting from casual travel day to something charged with tension and uncertainty. More barks erupted from Duke's throat. The TSA agent was approaching now, her face set in stern authority, clearly preparing to intervene. Other security personnel noticed the commotion and began moving closer, their hands hovering near their equipment, unsure if they were dealing with a threat. A young woman nearby pulled out her phone and started recording, the instinct to capture unusual moments now a reflexive human behavior. "Officer, you need to control that animal immediately, or I'm going to have to call for backup," the TSA agent stated firmly, now standing just a few feet away from Duke. "I understand. I'm so sorry. He's never done this before. Please just give me a moment," replied, his voice strained with effort as he continued pulling on the leash. But Duke was immovable, his entire being focused entirely on the girl in the pink jacket. The desperation in the dog's barking was almost heartbreaking. This wasn't aggression, was certain of that. This was urgency. This was a cry for help. This was communication of the most primal kind. The little girl's mother was now visibly frightened. "Is that dog attacking us? Is my baby in danger?" she called out, her protective instincts kicking into overdrive. She began backing away from the immediate area, still holding her daughter's hand, though the girl kept looking back at Duke with something almost like understanding in her young eyes. More passengers were recording now. Someone yelled, "Somebody call security." Another person shouted, "Is this some kind of terror alert?" The peaceful Tuesday morning at Denver International Airport was rapidly descending into chaos and confusion. The gate agent behind the desk stood up, unclear about whether to continue boarding or to cease operations until the situation was resolved. Duke's barking continued relentlessly, each bark more desperate than the last. Could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him now, could sense the collective anxiety building like a pressure cooker. The dog was pulling with such force that its arm was beginning to ache. This moment, this exact moment, was a crossroads. In the next few seconds, everything would change. Didn't know it yet, but he was about to witness something that would challenge everything he thought he understood about his partner's abilities and would ultimately save a child's life. The terminal descended into controlled chaos with remarkable speed. What had been a calm Tuesday morning transformed into a scene of confusion and fear within mere seconds. The TSA agent who had initially confronted immediately raised her radio to her lips. "We have a situation at Gate 9. K9 unit appears to be experiencing behavioral issues. Requesting additional security personnel," she reported, her voice steady but urgent. Within moments, her message was being relayed through the airport's communication system, and security officers from multiple locations began moving toward the disturbance. The gate agent at Gate 9 made an immediate decision to pause boarding. "Attention passengers, we're experiencing a brief delay. Please remain in the seating area," she announced over the gate's intercom, though her voice betrayed her own anxiety about the situation unfolding just beyond her desk. The approximately 40 passengers who had been in line to board the Southwest flight suddenly found themselves frozen in uncertainty, their eyes shifting between the gate agent, the commotion near the departure board, and their phones. Sarah, the little girl's mother, felt her heart rate spike dramatically. She was a pediatrician by profession, trained to remain calm in medical emergencies, yet nothing in her professional experience had prepared her for this. A police dog was barking with increasing desperation, seemingly fixated on her 7-year-old daughter, Emma. Every protective instinct in her body screamed at her to run, to get her child away from this unpredictable animal. She began backing away from Duke, and her grip on Emma's hand tightening. "Mommy, the doggy is scared," Emma said, her young voice cutting through the noise with innocent clarity. Despite her mother's obvious fear, the little girl seemed less frightened and more curious about the distressed animal. "Why is he barking like that?" "We need to move, sweetheart." "Come on," Sarah said, not answering the question, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if the dog attacked? What if this was some kind of security threat? What if Emma was injured? The what-ifs spiraled in her mind like a tornado of panic. She pulled her daughter toward a nearby seating area, positioning them behind a cluster of other travelers, creating distance between themselves and Duke. More security personnel were arriving now. Officer who worked in the same K9 unit as appeared from the corridor leading from the security checkpoint. Seeing his colleague in obvious distress, he immediately approached, his hand resting on his own belt. "What's going on? Is Duke okay? Is he having a medical episode?" asked, his training kicking in as he assessed the situation for threats. "I don't know," replied, frustration evident in his voice. "He's never done this before. He's never disobeyed a command, never acted like this. I don't understand what's happening." A third TSA agent, a woman named Officer who had worked at the airport for 12 years, made a critical observation. She'd seen many incidents, many false alarms, many situations that seemed dangerous but weren't. Something about his demeanor and his obvious confusion told her this wasn't typical K9 aggression. She'd seen aggressive dogs before. This seemed different. But her job was security, and security meant control. She positioned herself at a respectful distance, ready to act if the situation escalated further. The phone recordings were intensifying now. Multiple passengers had their devices up, capturing the scene. Within minutes, this footage would begin circulating on social media. One passenger, a freelance journalist, was already mentally composing headlines. "Police dog goes berserk at Denver airport. Aggressive K9 unit incident caught on camera. Security breach at DIA." The narrative was being written in real time by dozens of observers, each adding their own interpretation to events that no one fully understood. A small child near the commotion began crying, frightened by the loud barking and the obvious tension in the surrounding adults. The child's mother picked him up, consulting with another passenger about whether they should attempt to leave the terminal entirely. An elderly man sitting nearby stood up shakily, grabbing his cane, unsure if he should evacuate or if evacuation procedures had been initiated. The fear was contagious, spreading through the terminal like an invisible vapor. Emma watched the scene with the unfiltered perception of childhood. While her mother was caught in fear, while adults around them were interpreting danger, the little girl seemed to sense something else. There was something in Duke's barking that didn't sound angry to her. It sounded worried, almost pleading. She tried to look around her mother to get a better view of the German Shepherd, but Sarah kept repositioning herself to block her daughters. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to move to the secured seating area over there," Officer instructed Sarah, pointing to a more isolated section of the terminal. "We're implementing standard security protocol." "Is my daughter in danger?" Sarah demanded, her voice rising with maternal ferocity. "Is this airport safe? I want answers." "We're assessing the situation right now, ma'am. For everyone's safety, we need people to move to designated areas," replied professionally, though she had no answers to give. She was following protocol, doing what she was trained to do when something went wrong, even though she couldn't definitively say that anything was actually wrong. Felt sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. His arms ached from holding Duke's leash against the dog's relentless pulling. The situation felt like it was spiraling beyond his control, which violated every principle of his professional life. He was trained for control, for protocol, for managing complex situations. Yet here he was, unable to explain his own dog's behavior, unable to calm a terminal full of frightened people, unable to do anything but hold on. More officers arrived. Now 5 TSA agents, 3 airport security personnel, and 2 Denver police officers who'd been stationed in another terminal. They formed a loose perimeter around Duke, creating a buffer between the barking dog and the general public. It looked like a security containment, like they were protecting the crowd from a threat. "Officer, can you provide any information about what's precipitating this behavior?" one of the Denver police officers asked, his notebook already open, ready to document the incident. "I have no explanation," admitted, his voice heavy with frustration and bewilderment. "Duke has never disobeyed a command, never acted aggressively, never barked at someone without cause. Something is happening that I don't understand." "Has the dog been evaluated recently? Any health issues? Changes in behavior?" the officer pressed. "No, Duke passed his physical evaluation 3 weeks ago, perfect health, Perfect behavior record. The gate agent made another announcement. Attention passengers for Southwest Flight 427 to Phoenix. Due to a security situation, this flight is being delayed. We ask for your patience and cooperation. A buzz went through the terminal. Phoenix flight is delayed. There's a security situation. Something's wrong. The whispers, more phones came out. More videos were being recorded. Someone tweeted, "Something crazy happening at Denver Airport right now. Check back for updates." Another person posted on Instagram with the hashtag Denver Airport and a video of Duke barking. Emma suddenly said to her mother, "Mommy, my head feels funny." Sarah's medical training kicked in, overriding her fear about the dog situation. "Funny how, baby? What kind of funny?" She knelt down to her daughter's eye level, assessing her with a practiced eye. Emma did look slightly pale, now that her mother was actually looking at her face rather than reacting to the external chaos. The girl's skin had a slight sheen of perspiration despite the cool terminal temperature. "I feel sleepy but also weird," Emma explained, yawning slightly. "My tummy feels empty but also weird inside." "When did this start?" Sarah asked, her pediatrician's mind beginning to analyze symptoms. "This morning. I told you I felt funny, but you said it was just because we're flying." Sarah's expression shifted from fear to concern of a different kind. She ran through mental checklists of childhood illnesses, conditions, complications. Meanwhile, above all the human panic and confusion, Duke continued barking, not with aggression, but with the desperation of a creature trying to communicate something vitally important, something that the humans around him were too frightened and confused to understand. The dog was trying to save a life, but nobody yet knew that's what was happening. In that moment, suspended between chaos and understanding, made a decision that would change everything. He was standing in the center of attention, surrounded by security personnel, his dog barking with increasingly desperate intensity at a little girl in a pink jacket. Every protocol in his training suggested that he should be consolidating control, calling for backup, possibly having Duke removed from the situation. But had learned over 7 years of partnership with Duke to trust something beyond protocol. He'd learned to trust his gut, and his gut was screaming that this wasn't aggression. This was something else entirely. Closed his eyes for just a moment, blocking out the noise and chaos around him. He thought about the previous occasions when Duke had alerted to medical emergencies. The woman in the shopping mall who'd been having a silent heart attack, Duke had barked at her, and everyone around them had been confused, frightened, uncertain. The child in the parking lot with an undiagnosed seizure disorder, Duke had alerted, and it had seemed aggressive to bystanders, but it had been diagnostic, not dangerous. Every time, people had misinterpreted Duke's behavior as aggression or malfunction. Every time, Duke had been trying to save a life. "Everyone, please give us some space," called out, his voice cutting through the ambient noise with surprising authority. "I need to speak with the mother and daughter. This might not be what we think it is." Officer looked skeptical. "Officer, protocol requires." "I understand protocol," interrupted respectfully. "But I've been working with this dog for 7 years, and I can tell you with certainty that he's not behaving aggressively. He's alerting to something. Please, just give me a moment." Who had known for 5 years recognized the conviction in his colleague's voice. "Let's give him room," knows his dog. Slowly, reluctantly, the security perimeter loosened slightly. Handed Duke's leash to, who stood holding the still barking German shepherd, keeping him from lunging forward but allowing to approach Sarah and Emma directly. The movement immediately seemed to increase Duke's agitation. The dog wanted near the girl, wanted the handler to understand what he was detecting. Approached Sarah slowly, his hands visible and open, his expression carefully neutral and non-threatening. He'd learned how to approach frightened people during his years in law enforcement. "Ma'am, I need you to listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice calm and measured. "My name is Officer. My dog is not dangerous, and he's not attacking. I know this is frightening and confusing, but I believe he's detecting a medical issue." Sarah's eyes were wide with suspicion and fear. "Your dog is barking at my daughter like it's going to attack her, and you're telling me this is medical?" "I know it sounds strange," acknowledged, "but Duke is specially trained to recognize certain medical conditions. He's never been wrong about this. Please, I need to ask you some questions about your daughter's health. Has she been complaining of anything unusual today? Any symptoms?" Emma looked up with curious eyes. Despite her mother's obvious distress, the young girl seemed less frightened of the officer than of the situation itself. Sarah hesitated, then recalled what her daughter had just mentioned moments before. "She said this morning she felt dizzy and sleepy," Sarah admitted slowly. "But I thought she was just nervous about flying. She seemed fine at breakfast. Well, actually, she didn't eat much. She said she wasn't hungry, which is unusual for her." Instincts sharpened. Dizziness, sleepiness, lack of appetite. Has she had any other medical issues? Any ongoing conditions I should know about? "She's type 1 diabetic," Sarah replied, and as soon as the words left her mouth, her expression changed. Her eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. "Oh my God, do you think, is her blood sugar?" "That's exactly what I think," said gently. "How long has it been since you checked her levels?" Sarah's face went pale. "Last night before bed, she was fine. 127, but that was almost 14 hours ago. We had breakfast early and then we rushed to get to the airport. I was so focused on getting us here on time that She trailed off, horror beginning to register in her features. "I need to get a medical officer here right now," said, raising his voice to address officer. "This child is diabetic and may be experiencing a hypoglycemic event. We need to check her blood glucose immediately." Officer's expression shifted from suspicion to professional concern. "Medical emergency. I'm calling it in." She reached for her radio. "We have a potential medical situation at Gate 9, requesting airport medical personnel to respond immediately." Within seconds, the radio crackled with affirmation. A medical response team was being dispatched from the airport's first aid station, located approximately 2 minutes' walk away. Knelt down to Emma's level, trying to assess the child with the same careful observation that Duke had been attempting to communicate. "Hi, Emma, I'm Officer. I'm going to help you, okay?" he said softly. "Can you tell me how you're feeling right now?" Emma's small face scrunched in concentration. "I feel really, really tired, and my head feels spinny, and my tummy feels weird, like there's nothing in it, but also like there's something wrong inside it." "Those are really good descriptions, Emma. You're doing great," assured her. He stood and addressed Sarah. "You said she was 127 last night. That's a reasonable bedtime reading for a diabetic child. But between dinner last night and now, what time is it? 9:52 a.m. She's gone 14 hours without a check. With activity, stress, possible reduced food intake, that blood glucose could have dropped significantly." Sarah nodded and could see the guilt washing over her face. She was a pediatrician. She knew better. She knew the protocols for managing her daughter's condition. She knew that skipping checks, even for a few hours, was risky. She knew that airport stress and travel could affect blood glucose levels unpredictably. "I should have checked. I should have checked before we left the house," she murmured. "You're checking now, and that's what matters," said with compassion. Duke's barking had begun to shift in tone. The dog was still agitated, but his intensity seemed to be changing from frantic desperation to something more like persistence. "Still holding the leash," reported. "The dog is still pulling toward the girl, but the barking is changing. It's less panic now." "That's because he knows we understand," said. "Duke's job was to alert us to the problem. We're responding now, so he's transitioning from alert mode to completion mode." The airport's small medical team arrived within 4 minutes. An EMT named James, who'd been stationed at the terminal, and a nurse practitioner named Doctor, who worked part-time at the airport medical office. Both were trained to handle medical emergencies and well-versed in diabetic complications. "What do we have?" Doctor asked, immediately assessing Emma with professional eyes. 7-year-old female, type 1 diabetic, hasn't had glucose checked since approximately 7:30 p.m. yesterday, Sarah explained, slipping into medical terminology as she reported her daughter's condition. She's been reporting dizziness, unusual fatigue, lack of appetite. Last measured glucose was 127 dl approximately 14 hours ago. Doctor's expression became serious. She immediately produced a small glucometer from her medical kit. "Okay, Emma, I'm going to check your blood sugar really quickly. It might feel like a tiny pinch, but it's very quick, okay?" Emma nodded bravely. Doctor cleaned the child's finger with an alcohol wipe, then used a small lancet to prick her fingertip. A tiny drop of blood emerged. She placed it on the test strip, and they all waited for the glucometer to calculate and display the result. The seconds felt like hours. The entire terminal had gone quiet, hundreds of people now aware that something medical was happening. Passengers whispered to each other. Some still held their phones up, recording. The gate agent watched from her desk, concerned for the young girl who'd been about to board her flight just minutes earlier. The glucometer beeped. The number appeared on the small screen. Doctor's eyes widened. She looked then at Sarah, then back at the reading as if confirming what she was seeing was accurate. 42, she said quietly. Her blood glucose is 42 milligrams per deciliter. The medical significance of that number hung in the air like a thundercloud. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, closed his eyes briefly, a wave of validation washing over him. Duke had detected what no human could see, what no instrument could measure at a distance, what science was only beginning to understand about canine olfactory capabilities. "That's dangerously low," Doctor continued, moving into emergency response mode. "At this level, she's at risk for severe hypoglycemic shock. If this had progressed during flight, especially at altitude where medical response would be limited." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Emma suddenly yawned widely, her small body going limp. "I'm so sleepy," she whispered. "No, baby, stay with me," Doctor said urgently. "James, I need fast-acting glucose now. We need to get her levels up immediately. This is critical." The emergency response that should have been happening on an airplane at 30,000 feet was now happening in a terminal at sea level, thanks to a dog's extraordinary ability to detect what invisible to human senses. The moment Doctor spoke that single number 42, everything shifted into high-alert emergency mode. What had been a confusing, chaotic airport situation transformed instantly into a genuine medical crisis. James, the EMT, moved with practiced efficiency, already reaching into his medical kit for the emergency glucose supplies while simultaneously radioing for additional backup. "We have a pediatric hypoglycemic emergency at Terminal C, Gate 9. Blood glucose reading 42 dl initiating emergency treatment protocol," he reported into his radio, his voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "How did this happen?" Sarah demanded, her pediatrician's training warring with her maternal panic. "I checked last night. She was fine. We had breakfast. I should have known. I should have." "There's no time for that right now," Doctor interrupted gently but firmly. "We need to focus on bringing her glucose up. Emma, I need you to sit down right here." She guided the drowsy child to one of the nearby airport seats. Emma's movements had become noticeably sluggish, her eyelids heavy, her responses slowing. The dangerous descent into hypoglycemic shock was accelerating. James produced a small bottle of glucose gel and a package of glucose tablets. "Emma, sweetheart, I need you to take these. They're going to taste sweet, and they're going to help you feel better." He placed the gel and tablets in front of the child, but Emma's coordination was already becoming affected. Her small hands trembled slightly as she reached for the tablets. "Here, baby, let me help you," Sarah said, her voice cracking with emotion. She guided the glucose tablets to Emma's mouth, helping her daughter chew and swallow. The glucose gel followed, a thick, sweet substance designed to be absorbed quickly through the mucous membranes and provide immediate blood sugar elevation. Doctor was watching Emma carefully, monitoring for signs of continued deterioration. "When was her last insulin injection?" she asked Sarah. "This morning at 7:00 a.m. before breakfast. Just a standard dosage based on her carbohydrate intake," Sarah replied, her medical knowledge clashing with the reality that her professional expertise hadn't prevented this crisis. "And she ate what for breakfast?" "Toast with jam, a small glass of orange juice, and some scrambled eggs. Normal breakfast for her. Nothing unusual," Sarah said, her mind racing through calculations. "But then we rushed to finish packing, and she was running around getting excited about the trip. She burned a lot of energy before we left the house. And she didn't eat much lunch yesterday. She said she wasn't hungry. I was distracted with work yesterday, and I didn't pay close attention to." "Sarah, you need to stay focused on Emma right now," Doctor said with compassionate firmness. "Self-recrimination won't help her. What will help her is monitoring her response to the glucose and getting her to full medical evaluation." Around them, the entire terminal had become silent. The chaos and confusion of minutes earlier had transformed into something else, a collective holding of breath, a shared recognition that something serious was happening. Passengers who moments before had been recording on their phones now stood quietly, respectfully. A mother standing nearby was holding her own child closer, as if physical proximity could prevent similar tragedies. The businessman who'd been rushing was now standing perfectly still. Even the gate agent had abandoned her desk to watch what was unfolding. Stood with both officers maintaining a calm presence while allowing the medical team to work. Duke, still held on the leash, had stopped barking entirely now. The dog had transitioned from alerting to something almost like monitoring. His dark eyes remained fixed on Emma, but the desperate urgency had shifted to something more like watchful concern. Duke knew his job was done. He'd communicated the danger. Now it was up to the humans to respond. "How quickly should we see improvement?" Sarah asked Doctor, her voice small and frightened. "Glucose gel can start raising blood sugar within 5 to 10 minutes, Doctor explained. "The tablets will take a bit longer. We should recheck her glucose in about 10 minutes to see if we're seeing the expected response. If she's not improving, we'll need to consider more aggressive intervention." Emma's head had drooped slightly against her mother's shoulder. Her breathing was becoming slightly shallow. These were signs of moderate to severe hypoglycemia. The child was slipping further into the danger zone with each passing minute. "Come on, baby, stay with me," Sarah whispered, brushing her daughter's pigtails away from her face. "Talk to me. Tell me something, anything." "I'm really sleepy," Emma murmured, her words becoming slightly slurred. "Can I sleep now?" "Not yet, sweetheart. Not just yet. We need to wait a little bit longer," Sarah said, fighting back tears. The irony was crushing. She was a pediatrician, trained in managing childhood diabetes, and yet here she was watching her own daughter descend into a medical emergency that she should have prevented. James was preparing additional medical supplies just in case. He had intravenous equipment ready, glucagon injection kits prepared. If Emma's condition continued to deteriorate, if the oral glucose wasn't working fast enough, they would need to escalate to more invasive interventions. The stakes were becoming increasingly clear to everyone watching. This wasn't a minor medical situation. This wasn't something to brush off as a travel inconvenience. This was a child's life hanging in the balance. Officer, who'd been standing nearby, quietly approached. "If that dog hadn't alerted," she said softly, "this child would be boarding a flight in another few minutes. She would have been trapped in an aluminum tube at 35,000 feet with no access to proper medical care, and her condition would have continued deteriorating." Nodded grimly. She could have had a full seizure. She could have lost consciousness entirely. At altitude with the stress and cabin pressure and limited medical resources. He didn't finish the sentence. The implication was clear. Without Duke's alert, without this intervention happening now, Emma's situation could have been fatal. A medical technician arrived with a portable blood pressure monitor. Doctor immediately began taking Emma's vital signs. Blood pressure is 88/54. That's low, but not surprising given the severe hypoglycemia, she reported. She made notes on her tablet, documenting everything for the medical record that would follow. The waiting was agonizing. 5 minutes passed. Emma remained drowsy, responsive but barely. Her mother continued talking to her, keeping her engaged, fighting the dangerous pull toward unconsciousness that hypoglycemia was exerting on her small brain. "Do you remember the kitten we saw at the pet store last week?" Sarah asked, desperately grasping for conversation. "The orange one with the white paws." "Yeah," Emma whispered, her voice distant. "It was cute." "It was very cute. And remember how you said you wanted to name it Tiger?" "Ma'am," Emma responded minimally. 7 minutes had passed. Doctor was watching Emma carefully, assessing for any signs of improvement. The glucose should be starting to work by now. The tablets should be dissolving in her stomach, beginning their slow absorption. The gel should have already started elevating her blood glucose levels through rapid mucous membrane absorption. "Let me check her again," Doctor said, preparing the glucometer. Her hands moved with calm professionalism, despite the urgency of the situation. She cleaned Emma's finger again, pricked it, and placed the small drop of blood on the test strip. They waited. The glucometer beeped. 58, Doctor announced. "We're moving in the right direction. We've gained 16 points in 8 minutes. That's good progress, but she's still dangerously low." The small improvement felt like a victory, yet the danger remained. At 58 dl, Emma was still at serious risk. Normal blood glucose for a child was between 70 and 100 dl. Anything below 70 was considered low blood sugar. Anything below 50 was severe and dangerous. "We need to continue monitoring closely," Doctor said. "James, let's get her some additional fast-acting carbohydrates. A juice box would be good, something with quick absorption." James immediately produced a small juice box from his medical supply. "Emma, drink this for me, okay? It's going to help you feel better." Emma, slightly more alert than she had been moments earlier, sipped the juice. The combination of glucose gel, glucose tablets, and now juice was beginning to have a cumulative effect. Her eyes seemed slightly more focused. Her head lifted a bit from her mother's shoulder. "That's it, baby. Keep drinking," Sarah encouraged, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She looked up at, and in her eyes was profound gratitude mixed with the realization of how close to catastrophe they had come. Around them, passengers who had been silently watching began to understand the gravity of what had just transpired. One elderly woman whispered to her companion, "That police dog just saved that little girl's life." The words began to spread through the terminal, a quiet recognition of what had seemed like chaos just minutes ago, but was actually a miracle unfolding in real time. Duke, still beside, remained calm and watchful, his extraordinary senses having done what they were meant to do. The dog had bridged a gap between what animals could perceive and what humans needed to know. He had barked desperately, and now a child was being saved. 15 minutes after the initial glucose gel administration, Emma's blood glucose reading had climbed to 87 dl. She was still low by normal standards, but she had crossed the threshold from critical danger into manageable territory. Her alertness had improved noticeably. Her eyes were clearer, more focused. The dangerous lethargy that had characterized severe hypoglycemia was beginning to lift. She sat in the airport chair, looking small and vulnerable in her pink jacket, sipping another juice box while her mother sat beside her, one hand never leaving her daughter's back. Doctor continued monitoring, taking another reading every 5 minutes, watching the trend line carefully. "She's stabilizing nicely," she reported. "We should continue with regular glucose snacks and monitor her levels every 10 minutes for the next hour. We'll need to do a full medical evaluation at the hospital, but acute danger seems to be passing. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment of relief before the questions and recriminations began flooding back. Standing several feet away with Duke, approached Sarah and Emma gently. "Is there somewhere more private where we could talk? I'd like to understand what happened," he said respectfully. Sarah nodded, her emotions raw and conflicted. Officer arranged for them to use a small office space adjacent to the security checkpoint, a quiet, private area away from the hundreds of curious eyes still watching from throughout the terminal. Dr. James, Sarah, and Emma moved into the space, leaving Duke with another officer just outside the door. Even separated from Emma, the dog remained calm, as if confident that his work was complete and the humans now had control of the situation. Once they were seated around a small table, Sarah began to speak. Her words came slowly at first, then with increasing speed as she processed the events and began to explain the circumstances that had led to her daughter's life-threatening emergency. Emma was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 3 years ago, Sarah began, her professional demeanor returning now that she was in a more controlled environment. She was 4 years old when we first noticed the symptoms: excessive thirst, frequent urination, unexplained weight loss. We took her to her pediatrician and they ran blood work. Her blood glucose was 487 and her A1C was 11.2. She was in diabetic when we took her to the hospital. Doctor nodded in understanding. DKA, diabetic, was a serious and potentially life-threatening complication of type 1 diabetes, particularly in newly diagnosed children. "It was terrifying," Sarah continued, her voice thick with remembered emotion. "I'm a pediatrician and I still didn't see it coming. I was so focused on work on my patients that I didn't notice the signs in my own child. We spent 5 days in the hospital while they stabilized her, educated us on insulin management, carbohydrate counting, glucose monitoring. It was overwhelming and humbling and made me realize how quickly things can go wrong with diabetes." "She's been managing well since then?" Doctor asked. "Yes, very well," Sarah confirmed. "She's had 3 years of good control. We do her insulin injections twice daily, a longer-acting insulin at night and rapid-acting insulin with meals. We check her glucose before meals and before bed. Usually everything is stable and predictable. Emma is actually very good about managing her condition. She understands what she needs to do. She's careful. She's responsible." "So what happened this morning?" asked gently. Sarah took a deep breath, and the guilt that had been evident since the crisis began intensified visibly. "This morning was chaotic. I had a late surgery yesterday, an appendectomy that ran longer than expected. I didn't get home until nearly 8:00 p.m. I was exhausted. Emma had already eaten dinner, and I was trying to pack while also handling some work emails. I gave her insulin at 7:00 a.m. this morning. It was a normal dose based on what she was eating for breakfast. Toast with jam, eggs, orange juice. Standard carbohydrate count. But then, doctor prompted. But then my hospital called. There was an issue with one of my post-op patients from yesterday. Nothing life-threatening, but something that needed my attention before I left for vacation. I was on the phone with them for about 40 minutes. During that time, Emma was running around, getting excited about the trip, packing her toys, jumping on the couch. She was burning a lot of energy." Sarah paused, looking at her daughter with an expression of heartbreaking maternal guilt. Emma, unaware of the significance of the conversation, was focused on finishing her juice box, her young mind not yet grasping that she'd been in genuine danger. "I should have given her a snack before we left," Sarah continued. "I should have known that with the activity level and the stress and the travel ahead, she'd need additional carbohydrates, but I was distracted. I was thinking about my patient. I was thinking about getting to the airport on time. I was thinking about everything except what I should have been thinking about, my daughter's medical needs." Doctor reached across the table and placed a hand on Sarah's arm. "You couldn't have predicted this. Diabetes is unpredictable. Even with perfect management, blood glucose can drop unexpectedly. But that's exactly why I should have been more vigilant, Sarah insisted. I know better. I should have checked her glucose before we left the house. I should have checked it at the airport before we got to the gate. Instead, I was rushing and I was complacent. I thought because she'd been stable for 3 years I could relax my vigilance. I was wrong. What happened with food intake yesterday? Asked, trying to understand the complete picture. She didn't eat much for lunch, Sarah recalled. She said she wasn't hungry. I pushed her a bit, but she refused. Then we had an early dinner around 5:30 p.m. and she ate normally. But that was almost 16 hours before the airport incident. With elevated activity this morning and no glucose check between 7:30 p.m. and the airport, her levels just kept dropping. Doctor nodded thoughtfully. It's a perfect storm of circumstances. Lower food intake the day before, elevated activity in the morning, insulin that was still active in her system, stress hormones that can affect glucose metabolism, and no monitoring to catch the problem. Any one of those factors alone might have been manageable. All of them together created a critical situation. Which is why her diabetes bracelet exists, Sarah said, gesturing to the medical alert bracelet on Emma's wrist. And why we're supposed to check glucose regularly. And why we're supposed to carry fast-acting carbohydrates at all times. I did everything right for 3 years and then I got complacent for one morning and my daughter almost died. You're being too hard on yourself, doctor said firmly. Hypoglycemia happens to diabetics despite perfect management. The difference is whether there's someone there to help when it happens. If Emma had been on that airplane. I know, Sarah interrupted, her voice breaking. If she'd been on that airplane, I might not have my daughter right now. The weight of that reality settled over the small office. Emma finished her juice box, unaware of the magnitude of what had almost happened to her. She was a 7-year-old child who'd felt sleepy at the airport and had been given some sweet-tasting treatments by nice people. She didn't yet understand that a police dog had detected a chemical change in her blood, that a medical crisis had been averted by seconds, that her mother's inattention combined with biological unpredictability had nearly resulted in her death. Glanced toward the door where Duke waited. I want to explain something about your daughter's condition and what Duke detected, he said. Please, Sarah said, desperate to understand how the dog had known. Emma's blood glucose of 42 dl means her body was undergoing significant metabolic changes, explained, drawing on knowledge he'd gained from researching Duke's remarkable abilities. When blood glucose drops that low, the body releases stress hormones, adrenaline, glucagon, cortisol. It also begins burning fat for energy, which creates ketones. These metabolic byproducts create volatile organic compounds, chemicals that are released through breath, sweat, and skin. Dogs have approximately 300 million olfactory receptors in their noses, compared to humans' 6 million. They can detect these chemical changes at concentrations parts per million. Duke was literally smelling the biochemistry of your daughter's critical condition. So he was diagnosing her, Sarah asked, amazed. In a way, yes, confirmed. Not through training in the traditional sense, but through an instinctive recognition of abnormal body chemistry. Medical alert service dogs can be trained to recognize specific scents associated with conditions like diabetes, seizures, and cardiac events. Duke has natural ability in this area. He detects these situations and alerts his handler. The handler then makes the decision about what to do. And you trusted him, Sarah said, looking at with profound gratitude. When everything looked chaotic and confusing, when everyone was afraid, you trusted your dog enough to investigate rather than to try to control the situation. I've learned that Duke is almost always right about these things, said simply. My job is to listen to him. Doctor was already making mental notes about this incident. I want to follow up with your endocrinologist, she said to Sarah. I'd like to document this case for the medical literature. This is remarkable, a police dog detecting severe pediatric hypoglycemia and enabling intervention before critical medical deterioration. It could help advance understanding of how animals perceive metabolic emergencies. Can we also follow up with Officer? Sarah asked, looking at. I want Emma to understand what happened here. I want her to know that she has allies, human and canine, who are watching out for her. I want her to see that having diabetes doesn't make her less capable. It just means she needs to be aware and careful. Absolutely, agreed. Duke would probably enjoy meeting Emma again under better circumstances. And I'd like Emma to understand that what happened today wasn't a failure on your part or hers. It was a reminder that we all need help sometimes, and that asking for help or accepting help isn't weakness. Emma, listening to the adults talk, suddenly asked, "Can I pet the doggy again?" Everyone in the room smiled, the first genuine smile since the crisis began. Sarah reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Yes, sweetheart. I think the doggy would like that very much." Footage from a dozen passenger phones had already begun circulating on social media before Emma's blood glucose had stabilized above 80 dl within 2 hours of the incident. Hashtags like Police Hero at DIA, Dog Saves Life, and Duke the Hero were trending on Twitter and Instagram. News outlets were receiving calls from passengers who'd witnessed the event, each describing their own version of what they'd seen. The story had all the elements that resonated with modern audiences: drama, danger, an unexpected hero, a child's life hanging in the balance, and a resolution that easy explanation. By late afternoon, local Denver news stations were running segments. By evening, national news networks were picking up the story. By the next morning, the incident at Denver International Airport had become a media sensation. The headline variations proliferated across screens. Police dog's extraordinary ability saves child's life. Miracle at the airport. K9 detects life-threatening condition. German Shepherd's keen senses prevent tragedy. The dog who could smell danger. Who had always been intensely private and uncomfortable with attention, found himself suddenly thrust into the spotlight. His phone began ringing before he'd even left the airport. His sergeant captain called him personally. "We're getting media requests from every outlet you can imagine. They want to interview you, photograph Duke, get the full story. How are you handling this?" "I'm not interested in the attention, Captain," replied honestly. "Duke did the work. He deserves the credit, not me." "I understand," Captain said, "but this is bigger than just you now. This story is resonating with people. It's showing the value of the K9 unit in ways that years of budget proposals couldn't. People care about this. You're going to have to give some interviews." By that evening, as Emma was being admitted to Denver Children's Hospital for observation and continued monitoring, was doing his first official interview with a local news anchor. He sat in the police department's media room with Duke lying calmly at his feet. The anchor, a woman named Tors, approached the interview with obvious emotion. "Officer, can you describe what you were thinking when Duke started barking at the little girl?" she asked. "I was thinking that Duke has never in 7 years of partnership behaved this way without cause," replied carefully. "When a dog is trained as extensively as Duke is, and when that dog breaks protocol, it means something significant is happening. I've learned to trust that." But people were frightened. Security was alarmed. "How did you know that Duke wasn't being aggressive?" "I know Duke," said simply. "I know the difference between his alert bark and aggression. This was neither. This was desperation. This was a dog trying to communicate something urgent. And yes, I trusted my instincts about my partner." The interview aired that evening and was immediately picked up by national networks. By the next morning, and Duke were being featured on Good Morning America. Then came invitations for interviews with NPR, The Today Show, major newspapers. Everyone wanted the story of the heroic police dog. Duke's photograph appeared on news websites, in newspapers, on television screens across the country. Social media was flooded with stories about service animals, with praise for his decision to trust his dog, with questions about how many other extraordinary abilities service dogs possessed that humans simply weren't paying attention to. The Denver Police Department received thousands of messages. Parents of children with diabetes sent letters thanking Duke for raising awareness about the life-threatening nature of hypoglycemic episodes. Medical professionals wrote expressing amazement at Duke's abilities and interest in conducting research on how dogs detected metabolic emergencies. Children's hospitals across the country began reaching out, asking if could speak about Duke's capabilities and how to better utilize service animals in medical settings. Meanwhile, Emma and her mother were experiencing their own form of celebrity. Sarah had decided to be open about their experience, and she began giving interviews as well. In every interview, she emphasized her guilt about not checking Emma's glucose that morning and her profound gratitude to Duke, an officer, for preventing tragedy. "I was a negligent parent," Sarah said on one interview, tears streaming down her face. "I got complacent. I thought because Emma had been stable for 3 years I could relax. I couldn't. Diabetes doesn't work that way. And I almost paid the ultimate price for that complacency. If not for this dog, if not for Officer trusting his instincts, I would be burying my daughter instead of planning her 8th birthday party." The interview went viral. It sparked conversations about parental guilt, about the unpredictability of chronic illness management, about the importance of vigilance even when things seem stable. Diabetes advocacy groups picked up the story and used it for awareness campaigns. The American Diabetes Association contacted both Sarah and about speaking at their annual conference. Schools across the country began inviting to speak about police dogs and about trusting instinct and training. A week after the incident, the Denver Police Department held a special ceremony. Emma, still being monitored closely but doing well, was present with her mother. Captain presented Duke with a formal commendation medal, a rare honor for a K9. The medal was attached to a special collar that Duke wore with obvious pride, though the dog seemed more interested in the attention being lavished upon him by Emma than in the formal ceremony itself. "Officer and his partner Duke have the extraordinary work that our K9 unit performs daily," Captain said, addressing the gathered police officers, media, and public. Duke's exceptional abilities and officers' trust in his partner combined to prevent what could have been a tragedy. They have demonstrated the remarkable bond between handler and animal, and they have shown us all why we should never underestimate the capabilities of our four-legged partners. Emma was invited to present Duke with a drawing she'd created, a picture of the German Shepherd with stars and hearts surrounding him, with the words "Hero Dog" written in the careful letters of a 7-year-old. Duke approached the child gently and allowed her to pat his head, and in that moment, captured on dozens of cameras, the pure connection between a child who'd been saved and the animal who'd saved her was evident to everyone watching. The national attention continued for weeks. Publishers contacted about writing a book. A production company expressed interest in making a documentary about Duke. An animation studio suggested creating a children's show based on the story. Schools wanted assemblies. Universities wanted to study Duke's abilities. The medical community wanted to understand the science behind his detection capabilities. Through it all, remained humble and consistent in one message: Duke deserves all the credit. My job was simply to trust him. But the impact went far beyond Duke. The incident sparked a national conversation about police dogs and their capabilities. Departments across the country began reconsidering their K9 protocols, asking whether they were potentially missing opportunities to save lives. Medical alert dog organizations saw a surge in applications and funding. Research institutions began studying canine olfactory capabilities with renewed urgency. Universities started programs to train service dogs, specifically for detecting metabolic emergencies in diabetic patients. Sarah began writing about her experience. Her articles appeared in parenting magazines, medical journals, and online platforms. She spoke at diabetes conferences about the importance of consistent monitoring and the reality that even experienced parents could make mistakes. She became an advocate not just for diabetes awareness, but for the recognition of service animals' extraordinary abilities. Emma, perhaps most remarkably, became something of a child ambassador for both diabetes awareness and animal appreciation. She started a blog called Emma's Adventures with Diabetes, where she wrote about managing her condition, about her experience at the airport, and about her new friendship with Duke. Children from across the country began following her story, writing letters, sharing their own diabetes experiences. 1 month after the incident, a local organization organized a community celebration called Heroes Among Us that honored both human and animal first responders. Duke was featured prominently, alongside firefighters, paramedics, and other police officers. Emma was invited to speak, and she stood on a small platform, looking tiny but determined, and said something that captured the hearts of everyone listening. "Duke saved my life, but not because he's a superhero. He saved my life because Officer trusted him, and because my mom listened when Officer explained what was happening. Superheroes are real, but they're not people with superpowers. They're people who pay attention, who trust each other, and who care enough to help when someone is in trouble. Duke is a superhero because Officer let him be one, and I'm grateful every single day." The applause that followed was thunderous, emotional, and heartfelt. Grown adults wiped away tears. Parents held their children closer. The story of a police dog's bark that had seemed inexplicable in one moment had become a symbol of trust, partnership, and the extraordinary ways that humans and animals could work together to save lives. Retry 3 months had passed since that Tuesday morning at Denver International Airport, when Duke's desperate barking changed multiple lives forever. On this crisp Friday afternoon in January, Emma sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, fingers poised above the keyboard, composing her latest blog post. Outside her window, snow fell gently across the Denver landscape. Inside, the house felt warm and filled with purpose. Emma had decided to write about the medical research that had emerged from her experience, translating complex scientific concepts into language that other children with diabetes could understand. "Mom, does olfactory mean the same thing as nose-related?" Emma called out to her mother, who was preparing dinner in the adjacent kitchen. Sarah emerged, wiping her hands on a towel, and leaned over her daughter's shoulder. "Close enough for a blog post, sweetheart. Your readers will understand what you mean." She kissed the top of Emma's head, a gesture that had become more frequent since the airport incident, each kiss carrying the weight of gratitude for her daughter's continued existence. Emma had transformed in those 3 months. The incident that had terrified her mother had become, for Emma, a kind of awakening. She no longer viewed her diabetes as something shameful or limiting. Instead, she saw it as part of her story, part of what made her unique. She'd become an ambassador of sorts for other children with diabetes, receiving letters weekly from kids across the country who'd read her blog and felt less alone in their struggle. Just last week, a 9-year-old from Arizona had written, "Before I read your blog, I thought having diabetes made me broken. Reading about your life made me realize I'm not broken. I'm just different, and different can be okay." Sarah, meanwhile, had made significant professional changes. She'd reduced her surgical practice from full-time to part-time, redirecting her career focus toward pediatric diabetes care and awareness. She'd written a paper titled "The Cost of Complacency," a physician mother's perspective on chronic illness management, that had been accepted for publication in a major medical journal. In it, she discussed candidly her failure to check Emma's glucose that morning and the lessons that failure had taught her. The paper had resonated deeply with other healthcare professionals who recognized themselves in her story. The tendency to let professional expertise create false confidence, the way routine could breed carelessness even in those trained to know better. "I've been invited to speak at 3 pediatric conferences this spring," Sarah told Emma as she returned to cooking dinner. "One of them specifically wants me to talk about implementing better diabetes monitoring protocols in schools. I'm going to suggest that we include information about service animals' abilities to detect emergencies." Emma smiled, having heard variations of this conversation multiple times. Her mother's transformation had been profound. The guilt that had initially consumed Sarah had gradually transformed into purpose. She'd become a passionate advocate not just for diabetes awareness, but for systemic changes in how chronic illness was managed in pediatric populations. Across town, in the Denver Police Department's K-9 unit facility, officer was preparing Duke for a demonstration at a local elementary school. This would be Duke's 37th public appearance since the airport incident. The dog had become something of a celebrity and had initially resisted the attention. But he'd come to understand the value of what Duke represented, a tangible example of trust, partnership, and the extraordinary capabilities that existed in the world if humans simply paid attention and listened. The research on Duke's abilities had become increasingly sophisticated. Dr. Elizabeth, a researcher from the University of Colorado's neuroscience department, had approached about allowing Duke to participate in controlled studies examining canine olfactory detection of metabolic changes. Over the past 3 months, Duke had several research sessions where scientists measured his physiological responses to various scents, some normal, some associated with different blood glucose levels. The preliminary findings are remarkable, Doctor had told just last week. Duke's olfactory system is responding to volatile organic compounds associated with hypoglycemia at concentrations so low that they're essentially imperceptible to human instruments. We're talking parts per billion. It's extraordinary, and it suggests that with proper training, many dogs could potentially develop similar capabilities. This research was already beginning to influence service dog training programs across the country. Organizations that trained alert dogs for diabetic patients reported a surge in success rates after implementing new training protocols based on Duke's abilities. Several major medical centers had begun exploring partnerships with service dog organizations to place trained diabetic alert dogs in pediatric wards and clinics. But perhaps the most meaningful development had been the friendship that had formed between Emma and Duke. Had arranged for monthly meetings between the girl and the dog, and these encounters had become the highlight of Emma's month. She'd take Duke for walks around her neighborhood, and children she encountered would often ask to pet the famous hero dog. Emma would explain, in her careful 8-year-old way, what had happened at the airport and how Duke had saved her life. "He's not a superhero because he's a dog," Emma would tell other children. "He's a superhero because he pays attention. He noticed something that everyone else missed, and he kept barking until someone listened. We can all be like that. We can all pay attention and help people, even if we're different or small or don't have superpowers." The incident had also prompted significant changes at Denver International Airport. The airport administration had commissioned a study on security and medical response protocols, resulting in new procedures for handling potential medical emergencies. First aid stations had been upgraded and repositioned for better accessibility. Staff had received additional training in recognizing signs of various medical conditions. And most significantly, the airport had developed a formal recognition program for service animals, acknowledging their potential value in emergency situations. On this January afternoon, sat in an elementary school auditorium with Duke, preparing for a presentation to approximately 200 third and fourth graders. The children were buzzing with anticipation, excited to meet the dog that had become famous through news coverage and social media. Had learned how to structure these presentations to be engaging for children while conveying meaningful information. "Does anyone know what it means to trust someone?" asked the assembled students. Multiple hands shot up. A girl in the third row said, "Trust means believing that someone will help you and not hurt you." "That's exactly right," confirmed. "And can you trust something other than a person?" Emma, who was sitting in the front row as a special guest, raised her hand, smiled, and nodded to her. "You can trust an animal," Emma said clearly. "I trust Duke. He saved my life because he was paying attention and because Officer trusted him." The children turned to look at Emma with new interest. They knew her story, or at least they knew fragments of it from the news coverage and social media. Emma had become something of a celebrity herself, but she carried that distinction with humility and purpose. "Emma is absolutely right," said. "Duke saved Emma's life because I trusted his instincts. I listened to him when he was trying to communicate something important. And that's a lesson I want all of you to learn. Sometimes the most important things in life are about paying attention and trusting what you observe, even if it doesn't make sense at first." Duke performed some of his trained behaviors for the students, sitting, lying down, responding to hand signals. But what captivated the children most was when explained Duke's extraordinary sense of smell. "Dogs have about 300 million smell receptors in their noses," told the assembled children. "Humans have about 6 million. That means a dog's sense of smell is roughly 50,000 times better than ours. Can you imagine being able to smell 50,000 times better than you do right now? That would change how you perceive the world completely, wouldn't it?" The children nodded in amazement. One boy asked, "Could my dog save someone's life like Duke did?" "Maybe not in exactly the same way," replied, "but every dog has incredible abilities that we're just beginning to understand. The important thing is to pay attention to the animals in your lives. If your dog is acting unusually, if they're trying to tell you something, stop and listen. You might discover something important." After the assembly, Emma walked Duke around the school grounds while other children watched from classroom windows. It was a scene that had repeated dozens of times over 3 months. A girl, a dog, and the man who'd had the wisdom to trust his partner's instincts at a crucial moment. That evening, Sarah sat down to write a journal entry, something she'd begun doing more frequently since the airport incident. "Today marks exactly 3 months since the moment that changed our lives forever," she wrote. "I keep thinking about how close we came to losing Emma. I keep thinking about the choices I made that morning, rushing, being distracted, not checking her glucose. I keep thinking about how fate, timing, and an extraordinary dog intersected to save my daughter's life. But I've also learned something profound in these 3 months. We don't have to live in fear of what might have happened. We can't undo the past or prevent all dangers. What we can do is live with intention, pay attention to the people and animals around us, and trust that sometimes, when we do everything right, other forces align to help us." Duke didn't need permission to save Emma's life. He didn't need training or official authorization. He just needed someone to listen. I think there's a lesson in that for all of us. We spend so much time waiting for permission, waiting for certainty, waiting for the perfect moment. But sometimes, the most important moments are the ones where we simply pay attention and act with conviction. Emma's life is a testament to that truth. That same evening, and Duke were at home when's phone rang. It was Doctor from the university research program. "I wanted to tell you first," she said excitedly. "We've just received approval for a 3-year research grant to study canine detection of metabolic emergencies. Your participation in this research could potentially revolutionize how we train and deploy service animals. More importantly, it could lead to the development of new protocols that help hundreds or thousands of children with diabetes live safer lives." Felt Duke's head rest on his leg, the dog's dark eyes looking up at him with unconditional affection and understanding. "Count us in," said simply. As January snow continued to fall across Denver, 3 lives that had briefly intersected in chaos and confusion had been permanently transformed. A child had been given a second chance at life. A mother had been given a wake-up call about the fragility of complacency. An officer had been validated in his trust of his extraordinary partner. And a dog had proven, once again, that sometimes the greatest heroes walk on 4 legs and communicate through barks that echo far beyond the moments in which they're uttered. The story of Duke's desperate barking at Denver International Airport would continue to ripple outward, affecting medical protocols, training procedures, research initiatives, and most importantly, the individual choices of people who learn to pay attention to the extraordinary capabilities of the animals in their lives. One dog, one handler, one moment of trust had created a legacy that would persist far into the future. A reminder that miracles don't require superpowers, just attention, trust, and the willingness to listen when something tries to tell you something important.